My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 39, and I've spent 14 years making sure restricted money goes exactly where it's supposed to go. So when I saw my wedding florist on my twin sister's birthday livestream, I didn't think coincidence. I thought invoice. Olivia was standing beneath a 40-foot wall of white roses, while a string quartet played beside the same lighting installation I had approved for my reception. Behind her, my mother raised a champagne glass. To the daughter who deserves to be celebrated. Everyone cheered. I opened my laptop. 3 minutes later, I found the first payment. Then the second. Then the third. Venue. Florals. Production. Catering. All charged against the $1 million wedding distribution my grandmother's. My hand went cold on the trackpad. Then, I saw the authorization. Payment agent. Diane Ellison. My mother. She had used the limited authority I gave her to help pay my wedding vendors, and redirected those same vendors to Olivia's birthday. Ben stood behind me, staring at the screen. Mara, how much? I refreshed the account. Almost all of it. On Olivia's live stream, my father leaned into the camera while my mother kissed my sister's cheek. They looked happy, untouchable. They had no idea I was already downloading the original payment records. No idea I had just found a transaction code I recognized from years of old statements. And no idea that before their party ended, I would revoke my mother's access and formally dispute every remaining payment. 48 hours later, my phone showed 219 missed calls. But it was the 17th voicemail that made me stop breathing. My mother's voice was shaking. Mara, you have no idea what you've done. Olivia's account can't take another hit. I stared at the phone. Because I had never asked about Olivia's account. And suddenly, the missing $1 million wasn't the question anymore. It had started 48 hours earlier, with Ben asking me whether I wanted Thai food or the leftover chicken in our refrigerator. That was how ordinary the evening had been. He was standing barefoot in our kitchen in gray sweatpants, one hand resting on the refrigerator door, while I sat at the dining table finishing a reconciliation memo for a federal research grant. Ben Carter was 41 and worked as a project manager for a mid-size architecture firm in Center City. He understood schedules, overruns, and the special kind of misery caused by people saying, "It's just one small change." He also understood that when I said I needed 10 more minutes, I usually meant 25. Thai, I said, without looking up. Excellent. That was also my preference. You asked, like I had a vote. You did. You voted correctly. I smiled. Then my phone lit up beside the laptop. Olivia was live. My twin sister loved live streaming. New haircut, vacation, brunch, a package arriving at her door. Anything could become content if the lighting was flattering enough. I almost ignored it. Her 39th birthday party wasn't supposed to concern me. I had sent flowers that morning. We had spoken for 7 minutes. She had complained that Mom was being weirdly secretive about the party, and I had told her to enjoy it. That should have been the end of my involvement. Instead, I tapped the notification. The first thing I saw was the roses. Not just white roses. White roses woven through long sprays of greenery in alternating vertical panels. I knew that design. I had rejected the cheaper version of it 3 weeks earlier because the florist's revised proposal had used too much artificial greenery. Then Olivia turned her phone toward the stage. My stomach tightened. Ben. Something in my voice made him shut the refrigerator. What? Come here. He walked behind my chair. On the live stream, Olivia laughed as someone shouted for her to show the ballroom. She rotated slowly, giving the camera a view of the dance floor, uplighting, suspended glass fixtures, and a video wall displaying childhood photographs of her. Ben leaned closer. Isn't that? Yes. The lighting package for our reception had been custom designed because our venue had difficult ceiling angles. Ben had spent 2 evenings helping me compare 3 proposals. He knew it almost as well as I did. Olivia's camera moved again. At the edge of the stage, partially blocked by a floral arrangement, stood a black equipment case. On it was a white rectangular label. Hartwell Event Production. My production company. I minimized the live stream and opened our wedding folder. Ben pulled out the chair beside me. What are you checking? Vendor names. You think Mom hired the same people? I don't know what I think yet. That mattered to me. At work, Suspicion wasn't evidence. A number could look wrong and still have a perfectly ordinary explanation. A vendor could appear twice because the same company happened to serve two departments. A charge could land in the wrong place because someone clicked the wrong project code. You didn't start with an accusation. You started with the source document. I opened Hartwell's contract. Same company. Then the florist. Same company. Then the lighting vendor. Same company. My pulse had started beating hard enough that I could feel it in my jaw. Ben said, 3? 3. That's not random. No. I went back to Olivia's live stream. Someone had taken her phone, because now she was standing near the cake while my mother adjusted the shoulder of her dress. Mom looked beautiful. Of course she did. Diane Ellison had never met an important room she wasn't prepared to enter. Her silver blonde hair was pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. She wore pearl earrings and the navy silk dress she had originally bought for my engagement dinner. She lifted her glass. To Olivia, she said. The room quieted. To joy. To resilience. And to the daughter who deserves to be celebrated. People applauded. Olivia pressed her fingers to her lips. My father put an arm around her shoulders. I watched for maybe 2 seconds longer than I should have. Then I looked away. Ben said nothing. He knew my family well enough to understand why that sentence hurt. Not because Olivia didn't deserve a birthday. Because in my family, there was always one daughter who deserved to be celebrated, and one daughter who was expected to understand. I pulled up the secure trust portal. 6 months earlier, after Ben and I got engaged, I had requested the first marriage milestone distribution allowed under my grandmother's trust. $1 million. The number sounded absurd when said aloud, which was one reason I rarely said it aloud. The trust had been established when Olivia and I were children. Our beneficiary shares were separate, but before 40, major principal distributions still moved through trustee administration unless they fit one of the specific milestone provisions my grandmother had written into the documents. First marriage was one. First primary residence was another. At 40, the remaining principal of my share would come under my direct control. My 40th birthday was 10 months away. The wedding distribution had gone into a trust-owned disbursement sub-account rather than my checking account. I could see it, approve things, track payments. But because I traveled regularly for work and had no desire to spend Tuesday afternoons chasing catering invoices, I had signed a narrow payment agent authorization naming Mom. I had thought I was delegating paperwork. I had apparently opened a door. The account took several seconds to load. Ben rested both hands on the back of my chair. Whatever it says, we deal with what it says. That was one of the reasons I was marrying him. Not because he made bad things disappear. Because he didn't pretend they had. The balance appeared. For a moment, I thought I was reading it incorrectly. I refreshed the page. Same number. I opened transaction history. My chest tightened. 4 large payments had cleared in the last 9 days. A 5th was pending. Then a 6th. Venue. Lighting. Floral installation. Event production. Catering. The vendor names matched our wedding file. The amounts did not. Ben whispered, Jesus. I clicked the first payment packet. There was an invoice. Vendor information. An authorized payment agent submission. Trustee certification. A category line. Family milestone allocation, FMA, 17. I stopped. What? Ben asked. I know that code. From the wedding? I don't think so. I stared at the letters. FMA. I had seen them on statements before. Not recently enough to place exactly where, but enough that my brain had recognized the shape before I understood why. I downloaded the packet. Then the next. Then the next. Original files first. No highlights. No comments. No renamed versions. 14 years in grants administration had cured me of the urge to scribble all over source documents. You preserved the original, then made a working copy. Ben watched me create a folder. You're doing the work thing. I am. Is that good? It keeps me from calling my mother while I'm angry. That seems extremely good. I almost laughed. Instead, I opened the pending payments. One was for an additional catering balance. Another was for production overtime. I picked up my phone and called Naomi Park, our wedding planner. She answered on the 4th ring. Mara, everything okay? Probably not. I need you to tell me something without trying to make it sound better. A pause. All right. Did my mother change any of our vendor instructions? Another pause. Longer this time. Mara. Yes or no? Yes. Ben closed his eyes. I kept my voice level. How many? I need to check. Please. I heard keyboard clicks. Naomi came back sounding careful. Venue timing, florals, lighting, production. When? The first change request was a little over 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. My fingers tightened around the phone. Did you speak to me about any of them? No. Diane submitted them under the payment authority you filed. She said the family milestone schedule had shifted and she was coordinating the revised event. The revised event. Yes. Did she say whose event? Silence. No. Did any paperwork say Olivia? Not that I saw. I looked at the live stream, still running silently on my laptop. Olivia was dancing with Dad. Naomi, I need the original scope, every revised scope, all timestamps, the emails, invoices, and payment confirmations. Don't summarize them for me. I'll send everything. And please don't call my mother before you send them. Mara, I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm asking you to preserve my records. That landed differently. All right, she said. Give me 10 minutes. When I hung up, Ben sat beside me. 3 weeks. Yes. So this wasn't something she decided yesterday because Olivia was having a bad day. No. That was the first point where the word mistake stopped fitting comfortably. I still wasn't ready for a worse word. I called the corporate custodian. It took 11 minutes to get through security. I gave my beneficiary number, answered verification questions, and asked for the disbursement team. The representative who came on the line sounded approximately 26 and extremely determined not to say anything outside his script. I understood him immediately. I spent my own working life refusing to give people conclusions before I had documents. I'm disputing payments from my first marriage milestone subaccount, I said. Are you alleging unauthorized access? No. The payment agent was authorized to submit wedding expenses. I'm disputing whether these payments were within that authority. That changed the conversation. He pulled up the account. I see payment agent submissions with trustee certification. My mother is the payment agent. My parents are the trustees. Yes. What did your office receive for the cleared transactions? Invoice, approved vendor information, payment instruction, payment agent certification, and trustee certification. So from your side the packet was complete. On its face, yes. I appreciated the wording. Can pending transactions be paused while I submit a formal dispute and revoke the payment authorization? Yes, subject to review. What do you need from me? He listed the forms. I wrote them down. Then I asked for copies of every packet associated with the milestone subaccount. He told me how to request them. Nothing about the call was cinematic. No one gasped. No one said, "My God, Miss Ellison, we'll freeze everything immediately." Real systems didn't work that way. They required forms, identity verification, written notices, and people who cared very deeply about using the right verb. By the time I hung up, Naomi's email had arrived. So had 3 new messages from Mom. Call me. Where are you? Then, do not make this into something ugly. Ben saw that one. He made a sound somewhere between disbelief and anger. Our house fund is not touching this, he said. I turned toward him. He continued, more controlled now. We have $180,000 set aside for the down payment, emergency reserve, and whatever happens if one of us needs time off later. We are not emptying that because your parents did this. I nodded. I agree. And if the wedding has to change, we pause it. He looked at me. Pause? Not cancel. Not rebuild tonight. We pause all new commitments until we know what's real. His shoulders lowered slightly. Okay. It was a small decision, but it mattered. For most of my life, when my family created an emergency, I had learned to solve it before asking whether it belonged to me. This time, I refused to make our future the replacement account. Then I called Nadia Brooks. Nadia had reviewed the trust documents for me before I requested the marriage distribution, mostly because I wanted someone independent to explain the provisions instead of relying entirely on my parents. That decision now felt less like caution and more like foresight. I emailed her. The payment agent authorization, transaction packets, Naomi's change log, the trust milestone provision, my transaction list. When she called, she skipped the emotional language. First question: did you authorize Diane to pay expenses for Olivia's birthday? No. Did you authorize her to change the beneficiary purpose of the milestone distribution? No. Good. Second question: what do you want done tonight? Not what do you want me to do. What did I want done? I want her payment authority revoked. Okay. I want all remaining payment instructions disputed. Okay. I want preservation of the vendor and trustee records. Okay. And I want a formal accounting of my beneficiary share. That made Nadia pause. How far back? I looked at the FMA code on my screen. As far back as the records require. All right. She explained what would happen next. I signed the revocation electronically. I signed the dispute notice. Nadia transmitted both and called the custodian to confirm receipt. Then she notified my parents in their capacity as trustees. That was the call mentioned in Olivia's party later. Not a magical lawyer's phone call that returned $1 million. A notice. A formal statement that the daughter they expected to stay quiet had stopped giving them authority to act for her. 23 minutes later, Olivia's live stream ended. A cousin texted me. What did you do? Your mom just walked out of the ballroom. I didn't answer. Then Mom called. I let it ring once before picking up. What did you do? She demanded. I revoked your payment authority. You need to undo it. No. You don't understand what you've interrupted. I understand enough. Mara, there are vendors here waiting to be paid. That sounds like something the person who hired them should have planned for. A sharp breath. This is your sister's birthday. I know. She has had a terrible year. I know. And you still chose tonight to humiliate her. There it was. The transformation. My money had become Olivia's humiliation. I asked the question I had been holding since the first transaction packet. Did you submit Olivia's birthday invoices against my wedding milestone account? Mom went quiet. Not for long. Long enough. Mara, your sister needed one good night. Ben looked at me from across the table. I wrote the sentence down. Not because it was a confession. Because it told me how Mom understood what she had done. You were still going to get married, she continued. You have months. Olivia needed this now. Did Dad approve the payments? Don't drag your father into this. That wasn't my question. Mara. Did he approve them? You are behaving like one of your audits. I looked at the folders spread across my table. No, I said. In an audit, people usually give me the documents when I ask. She hung up. The next 48 hours were louder than the first 39 years of my life. Calls from Mom. Calls from Dad. Calls from Olivia. Calls from Aunt Elaine. Calls from cousins I usually heard from twice a year. A number I didn't recognize turned out to be a family friend. Another belonged to Olivia's former roommate. By the second day, my phone showed 219 missed calls. The messages changed in tone but not in substance. Your mother is devastated. Olivia didn't know. This should stay inside the family. You're really going to destroy everyone over money? Dad left one saying, Mara, you've turned a private family adjustment into a legal dispute. I saved that one. Olivia left 3. The first was furious. The second was crying. The third said, I don't know why you hate me this much. I sat on the edge of our bed, listening to it while Ben packed away the wedding brochures we had left on the dresser. I didn't hate her. That was almost the worst part. If I had hated Olivia, maybe the next thing would have been easier. Instead, I kept remembering us at 12, sleeping on the floor of each other's rooms despite having bedrooms 10 feet apart. At 17, when she cried in my car after a boy broke up with her. At 25, when I spent an entire weekend helping her build shelves for her first boutique. Love did not disappear simply because a bank statement became ugly. But love also did not change the numbers. I turned notifications off for everyone except Ben, work, Naomi, and Nadia. Then I listened to the voicemails in order. The 17th was from Mom. Her voice was no longer angry. It was frightened. Mara, you have no idea what you've done. Olivia's account can't take another hit. Call me before this gets worse. I replayed it. Ben stopped folding a shirt. What? I held up one finger and listened again. Olivia's account can't take another hit. I lowered the phone. What account? Ben asked. I looked toward the file box where 8 years of quarterly trust statements sat in neat white envelopes. I don't know. And that was the first moment I understood that the $1 million might not be the biggest thing my parents had hidden from me, because I had never asked what was left in Olivia's share. I had simply believed them every time they told me we were equal. The next morning, the quarterly statements came out of the file box, one envelope at a time. 8 years of them. Some were still sealed. That embarrassed me more than I wanted to admit. At work, unopened financial records made me twitch. A missing receipt could keep a research grant from closing for weeks. I had spent 14 years telling faculty members that money did not become harmless just because nobody looked at it. Yet my own statements had sat in a white storage box because the trustees were my parents. Trust had made me less careful than incompetence ever could. Ben left coffee beside me before heading to work. You going in today? He asked. In an hour. His eyes moved to the envelopes, spread across the dining table. Want me to stay? No. The answer came quickly, but not because I wanted to be alone with some heroic burden. Ben had deadlines. So did I. More importantly, I needed the next few hours to belong to facts rather than witnesses. He picked up his messenger bag. The house money stays where it is. Yes. And we don't sign anything new for the wedding. Yes. He hesitated near the door. What about the date? That question hurt in a different place. Our reception had been scheduled for early October. Invitations were not yet mailed, but save-the-date cards had gone out. Naomi had warned us that changing the ballroom package after summer would make availability unpredictable. 3 days earlier, the date had felt immovable. Now it looked like a line someone else had drawn around my life. We don't protect a date at the expense of everything after it, I said. Ben nodded once. Okay. No speech, no declaration that the wedding did not matter. Just okay. After the door shut, my hand rested on the top envelope. The return address belonged to the trust administrator. For years, those envelopes had carried about as much emotional weight as utility bills. I checked the ending balance, made sure nothing looked dramatic, then filed them. Apparently dramatic had been hiding inside boring. A half-hour later, the kitchen table looked like my desk during grant closeout. Statements on the left, notebook in the center, laptop on the right, originals untouched, working notes separate. That part of me still functioned. By 9:30, I was at the university. The fluorescent lights above our grants office were less forgiving than usual. Priya Nair looked up from her monitor when I dropped my bag beside my chair. You look like you slept in a tax audit. That would have been more relaxing. She studied me for another second, then let it go. Priya had worked beside me for 6 years. She knew the difference between curiosity and permission. A department administrator had left a reconciliation problem on my desk the night before. A lab had ordered specialized imaging supplies. The supplies were legitimate. The research was legitimate. The cost had simply landed on the wrong federal award. My junior administrator, Caleb, stood beside my desk while I pulled up the record. But the expense was allowable, he said. It was allowable for the project that used it. Right. This grant didn't. He rubbed the back of his neck. So we transfer it? We document why, then transfer it. He exhaled. At least nobody was trying to do anything wrong. My fingers stopped over the keyboard. Intent doesn't fix the ledger, I said. The charge still has to sit where it belongs. Caleb nodded and went back to his desk. The words stayed with me. Priya heard them too. About 20 minutes later, she rolled her chair into my doorway. Family money issue, she asked. That was all. Trust issue. Do you need me to know more than that? Not yet. Then I don't. She started to roll away. Priya. She looked back. What would make you decide a charge was a mistake instead of a pattern? Her expression changed not into alarm, just concentration. One bad code, maybe mistake. Same bad code, same direction, same person benefiting more than once? She tilted her head. I'd start asking better questions. That was all I wanted, not a verdict. A better question. The first one waiting for me at home that evening came from an envelope dated 7 years earlier. The initials were the same. FMA. Not the full description. Just the letters and an internal reference. A small allocation that year. Then another 2 years later. Then the year Olivia opened her boutique. None of them were close to $1 million. That made them easier to overlook. A $6,000 adjustment did not scream across a statement. Neither did $12,000. Neither did $21,000. Not inside a trust large enough that investment gains could blur ordinary fluctuations from one quarter to the next. My grandmother had designed the trust that way on purpose. Not to hide anything. To protect us from getting too much money too early. Her name was Beatrice Ellison, and she had possessed the rare ability to make generosity sound like an accounting principle. The trust had been created when Olivia and I were still children. Most of what I remembered from those years had nothing to do with money. Grandma kept peppermint candies in a glass dish by the piano and hated raisins in anything. The details of the trust only became real to me in my 20s. One afternoon, not long after I started graduate school, Grandma sat Olivia and me at her breakfast table with Mom and Dad. 2 folders waited in front of us. One for each twin. Separate shares, Grandma had said, tapping the folders with one finger. Same starting rules. Your lives don't have to match. Mom smiled. You girls will always be treated fairly. At the time, the sentence had sounded harmless. Grandma explained that our parents would serve as trustees while we were younger. Major principal distributions before 40 were limited except for specific milestones. Education. A first primary residence. A first marriage. At 40, what remained in each share would come under our direct control. Olivia had joked, "So you don't trust us until 40? Grandma had looked at her over the top of her glasses. I don't trust anybody with a large amount of money before they've had enough time to become disappointed in themselves. Even Dad laughed at that. I had been 24. 40 felt prehistoric. Now my 40th birthday was 10 months away. That changed the shape of what I was looking at. For the first time, I wrote the date at the top of my notebook. Mandatory control date. 10 months. Then, underneath, why now? The question made my stomach tighten. Not because I had an answer, because I did not. The next thing I pulled from the file was the limited power of attorney I had signed for Mom. Reading it while angry made me notice every sentence I had skimmed while trusting. Authorized purpose. First marriage milestone distribution. Authorized activity. Submit invoices. Coordinate approved wedding vendors. Confirm ordinary scheduling and scope adjustments. Prohibited. Transfers for another beneficiary. Prohibited. Gifts. Prohibited. Non-wedding distributions. Revocable at beneficiary request. Ben came home while I was reading the last page for the 3rd time. He loosened his tie and stopped behind my chair. That narrow? Narrower than I remembered. Then how did the payments go through? They used vendors already approved for my wedding. Categories already approved for my wedding. Mom didn't ask the custodian to send Olivia a birthday check. He sat opposite me. She turned your wedding into her birthday on paper. Maybe. The word made him frown. You still saying maybe? I know what happened with the party. I don't know what happened before the party. That distinction mattered. Ben reached for one of the statements but stopped before touching it. Can I? I slid the copy toward him. He looked at the rows without pretending to understand every abbreviation. So why did you sign the authorization? There was no accusation in his voice. That somehow made the answer harder. Because I was traveling twice a month. Because Naomi needed someone local who could approve a florist revision without waiting until I got off a plane. And because she was your mother. Yes. The word sat between us. A little too simple for how expensive it had become. Ben leaned back. What happens to October? The date again. This time I answered faster. We stopped treating it like a deadline. His shoulders dropped. We tell Naomi not to sign anything new. I continued. We keep whatever refund options we still have. The house reserve stays separate. Good. If we have to move the wedding, we move it. Ben rubbed his thumb along the edge of the paper. Your mom is going to say we're letting her ruin it. She already ruined the version she controlled. The sentence surprised me. Not because it was clever, because I believed it. That night, Olivia called. Her name flashed across my phone just after 10. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi. Are you seriously doing an audit of mom and dad? No, hello. No. A short laugh came through the speaker. Really? I'm reviewing my trust records. Same thing. No, it isn't. She sighed loudly enough for me to hear it. You have no idea what mom has been dealing with since the party. Neither did she, unless mom had told her. So I did not fill in the blank. What did she tell you happened? That you froze everything because you were mad about the birthday. I disputed pending payments from my wedding account. She said you agreed to scale down anyway. My hand tightened around the phone. When did I say that? I don't know. She said you'd been talking about simplifying. Talking about simplifying is not authorizing my wedding money for your birthday. Olivia went quiet for a beat. Then, it all evens out. That sentence did not sound like hers. What does? The trust, the family money, whatever. Mom said you're acting like every dollar has your name engraved on it, when eventually everything gets balanced. Balanced how? You know, we're equal. My eyes moved to the envelopes on the table. Olivia, what do you think is left in your trust share? Another pause. Enough. How much is enough? Why are you asking me that? Because mom said your account can't take another hit. The silence on the line became different. Not theatrical. Searching. She said that? Yes. When? In a voicemail. She was upset. That doesn't answer my question. Mara, I don't sit around memorizing account balances. Have you ever seen your statements? She snapped back immediately. Of course. Too quickly. So I waited. A few seconds passed. Then she corrected herself. I mean, mom goes over things with me. That isn't what I asked. Her voice sharpened. What are you trying to prove? Nothing yet. Then why does it sound like you've already decided I took something from you? I haven't said that. You don't have to. The accusation hit harder than I expected. Not because it was fair. Because some part of me still wanted her to be the person who asked what had happened before defending what she received. Instead, she said, Mom told me there are other accounts anyway. What other accounts? The family assets. Their brokerage account. The house. The lake place. Eventually it all goes to both of us. So why are you making this one account into the end of the world? There it was. Not the trust. Mom and Dad's personal estate. Their mainline house. The lake cottage our family had used since college. Their own investment accounts. Things they owned and could leave to anyone they wanted. For the first time, I heard the implied math. Lose something now. Get something later. Do not count too carefully in between. Have you ever seen the paperwork for any of that? I asked. Olivia sounded offended. There are parents. That was not an answer. It was the answer. After we hung up, I wrote one more line in my notebook. Future inheritance is not current balance. The following afternoon, Dad called. His voice was measured, which was how Leonard Ellison sounded whenever he wanted everyone else to feel unreasonable. Mara, this has gone far enough. The accounting request hasn't even started yet. That is exactly what I mean. He exhaled. Your mother handles these things between you girls. I was standing in the empty conference room at work, watching rain move down the windows. Which things? Distributions. Adjustments. The practical side. You're a co-trustee. That doesn't mean I manage every detail. Did you sign trustee certifications? The line went still. Not disconnected. Just still. Then Dad said, I signed what your mother put in front of me. My eyes closed briefly. There were so many versions of that sentence available to him. I didn't read it. I trusted her. I didn't understand. I should have asked. He chose none of them. Then you handled it too. Mara? Don't do that. Do what? Turn a marriage into a conspiracy. Our marriage? You know what I mean. No. Actually, I don't. He lowered his voice. Your mother was trying to keep things balanced. By signing payment certifications against my share? By taking care of both her daughters. The conference room suddenly felt too small. You keep saying, balanced. Olivia says equal. Mom says, fair. I'm looking at accounts. That's your problem. You reduce everything to numbers. No. Numbers are just what's left when everybody stops changing the explanation. Dad went quiet. Then he said, the sentence I had heard my entire adult life. You've always been the one who could handle more. Rain ticked softly against the glass. At 20, that sentence had made me proud. At 29, it made me useful. At 39, it sounded expensive. Then maybe I should have been asked before you gave me more to handle. He did not answer that. Instead, he said, "Talk to your mother." I'm talking to both trustees now. Mara, if your signature is on it, I'm not discussing this as if Mom acted alone. For once, ending the call did not make me feel powerful. It made me tired. But tired was different from uncertain. That evening, an email from Nadia was waiting when I got home. She had received the first batch of historical records from the custodian. Most were ordinary: annual accounting fees, tax preparation, legitimate shared administrative expenses. Then there were several FMA packets. I opened one from 3 years earlier. The category read Common Family Milestone Expense. The underlying invoice did not look common. A property management payment. Olivia's old address appeared in the service notes. I checked the date. Same month she had called me crying because she was 3 payments behind on her mortgage. My skin prickled. One entry did not prove a system, but it changed the question. I opened a new spreadsheet. Date, amount, stated category, actual vendor, related event, trustee approval, before and after, balance. The first row took less than a minute. The second took longer. By the third, the house had gone quiet around me. For years, Mom had told me Olivia needed more because she was struggling. I had never asked where more came from. Now, for the first time, I was going to find out. The spreadsheet grew faster than I expected. Not because the records were easy, because once the first line had a date attached to it, the next line became harder to ignore. The property management invoice linked to Olivia's old address had been coded as a common milestone expense. 2 quarters later, another adjustment appeared under the same family allocation category. Different vendor, different amount, same beneficiary. Olivia. By the time the clock on my laptop reached midnight, 7 rows sat on the screen. 3 were probably legitimate. That mattered. A tax preparation fee had been divided between both shares because both shares required the work. An annual trust accounting charge looked ordinary. A legal review fee involved amendments that applied to both of us. Those stayed in the spreadsheet. Deleting evidence that helped my parents would have made the whole thing easier emotionally and weaker factually. So I created another column. Reasonable shared expense? Yes. No. Unclear. The answer beside the property management payment was no. Ben came in from the bedroom, carrying a glass of water. You're still at it. For another 20 minutes. You said that an hour ago. I was lying to both of us. He set the water beside my laptop. My eyes had begun to burn, but the row in front of me mattered more than sleep. An adjustment from 5 years earlier had been coded as a family transition expense. The underlying vendor was a moving company. The destination address belonged to the townhouse Olivia rented after her divorce. That did not automatically mean the trust charge was improper. The question was whose share had paid for it. I checked the statement. A portion had come from mine. Not much. Enough. Ben leaned over my shoulder without touching the keyboard. What is that one? Moving expense. For you? No. He looked at the address. Oh. That one syllable carried more restraint than most of my relatives had managed in 2 days. Still could be something else, I said. Like what? I don't know yet. The answer irritated me. Good. I trusted irritation more than certainty at that point. Certainty was what Mom had always brought into a room before anyone else had time to ask questions. The next morning, the spreadsheet went to work with me. Not the trust documents themselves. Those stayed on my encrypted personal drive. Only the structure, the columns, the method. Priya came into my office after lunch with 2 coffees and placed one on the corner of my desk. You have the look. What look? The one you get when a number has insulted you personally. That is not a look. It absolutely is. A smile escaped before I could stop it. Then my eyes returned to the screen. Can you check something for me? Priya pulled over the chair beside my desk. No names? No names. No documents I shouldn't see. No. I had replaced identifying details with neutral labels. Beneficiary A. Beneficiary B. Common expense. Trustee 1. Trustee 2. Priya read through the columns. What are you trying to test? Whether I'm building the table to prove a conclusion I already want. She looked at me then. That's a dangerous question. That's why I'm asking it. For the next 10 minutes, she challenged the classifications. One entry I had marked questionable went back to unclear. Another I had marked common became probably beneficiary specific once she pointed out that the underlying service address belonged to only one person. No dramatic revelation. No best friend declaring my mother guilty. Just better categories. When she reached the bottom, she tapped the desk. You've got two different things here. What? Expenses that may have been coded wrong, and expenses that may have been coded wrong in the same direction. That distinction landed. Wrong once was error. Wrong repeatedly toward the same person was pattern. What would you need next? She asked. To know how the coding actually worked, then stop staring at outcomes and find the mechanism. That was exactly what I did. Nadia arranged a 3-way call with the custodian's trust administration team the next afternoon. By then, the first batch of records had been supplemented with trustee certifications and several payment packets. The administrator on the call, a woman named Melissa Grant, spoke slowly and precisely. I appreciated that. So, I want to make sure I understand, I said. There were 2 different processes over the years. Yes. The older adjustments were not made through my wedding authorization. Correct. They were trustee allocations. Yes. And the birthday payments were different because my mother was an authorized payment agent for the first marriage milestone subaccount. Correct. I wrote each answer down. Melissa continued. For the historical common expense allocations, trustees certified that the expense benefited both shares or fell within a permissible shared category. And your office relied on that certification. We relied on the documents submitted under the trust's administrative procedures. Not blind reliance. Not careless approval. A process. That mattered too. What about the birthday invoices? Those packages contained an authorized payment agent, approved vendor information, invoices within recognized event categories, and trustee certification. So, if the florist was already on my wedding vendor list, and the invoice still said floral installation, the category itself wouldn't necessarily show that the event had changed. That is fair. Nadia cut in. The legal issue is not whether the custodian should have known whose birthday it was. The issue is what was certified to them. I looked at one of the packets on my screen. Mom had not invented a fake florist. She had used mine. Had not created a mystery vendor. She had taken an approved vendor and changed the purpose behind the paperwork. That was worse in a quieter way. The door had not been broken. She had used the key I gave her. After the call, Nadia stayed on the line. What do you want next? She asked. Full transaction history for my share. You're entitled to request it. And the balance history for Olivia's share if it was used to justify any cross-allocation into mine. That part may be limited. You are not automatically entitled to every detail of another beneficiary's private account. Fair. What can I get? Records showing decisions that affected your share. If a trustee allocation relied on a claimed shared expense, we can request the support for that allocation. If the support references Olivia's benefit, that becomes relevant to your accounting. Again, not magic. Not unlimited access. Just a trail. Request it. Nadia paused. Everything. Everything that touched my share. That choice changed the scale of the fight. Until then, Mom could still call this a dispute about one birthday party. A bad decision. A temporary adjustment. A mother trying too hard to make one daughter happy. Once I asked for the history of every transaction that touched my share, the argument became something else. A record. The first answer arrived 4 days later. I was at my desk when Nadia's email came through. Call when you can. No exclamation point. No dramatic subject line. Still, my pulse changed. The conference room was empty. I closed the door and called. Nadia answered. Immediately. We have enough to establish a working balance history. For mine? For both. To the extent the trustee decisions affecting yours reference Olivia's. My fingers tightened around the phone. How bad? I'd rather send you the schedule and have you read it. Send it. The file appeared less than a minute later. 7 pages. No commentary. Dates. Opening balances. distributions, trustee allocations, closing balances. My eyes found Olivia's column first. Boutique support, divorce expenses, mortgage arrears, debt consolidation, living support. Not all of those were improper. In fact, the earlier ones appeared to have been taken entirely from Olivia's own share. That made the later entries more important. Her balance dropped, then dropped again. Then the shared classifications started appearing more often. Common family support, milestone adjustment, administrative transition. Each phrase looked harmless until I lined it up with the underlying vendor. The balance beside Olivia's name near the bottom of the schedule was nowhere close to mine. Not even close. "Are you still there?" Nadia asked. "Yes." "What do you see?" "Her share is almost empty. Substantially depleted." "How long have they known?" The trustees received quarterly reporting. Mom and Dad. Not some hidden accountant. The trustees. My eyes moved down the dates. Then something else registered. The biggest acceleration happened during the previous year. My 39th year. The year before mandatory distribution of my remaining principal. A pen was in my hand. I wrote one sentence on the legal pad. They knew the clock was running out. Then immediately crossed out the word they. Too certain. Records could show knowledge of balances. Records could show authority. Records could show timing. They could not show private motive unless someone documented it. So I wrote again. Cross charges increased as my control date approached. Why? That was a question I could defend. And a question I could investigate. By the time I got home, Ben was already there. He had ordered Thai food without asking this time. The containers sat unopened on the counter. "One of those nights?" he asked. "One of those nights." We sat across from each other at the dining table, where the whole thing had started. The balance schedule lay between us. He read only the figures I pointed to. "That's Olivia's?" "Yes." "And that's yours?" "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "So when your mom said Olivia's account couldn't take another hit, she wasn't exaggerating." The sentence made the room feel smaller. Ben looked toward the wedding binder on the shelf. "What does this do to us?" "Not the case. Not my parents. Us." That deserved a real answer. "I don't know how much of the million we'll recover." "Okay. I don't know how long the accounting takes." "Okay. And if we keep trying to force the original wedding back into place, we're going to start spending our own reserves to replace money that may never come back on our timeline." He nodded. "That's what I'm afraid of." "So am I." "There," said aloud. "Not strong. Not easy. Afraid." Ben leaned forward. "We can pay for a wedding." "Yes. We cannot casually replace $1 million. No. And I don't want our first year married to start with us emptying the money we saved for a house because your parents created an emergency." Neither did I. The original October date had sat in my head like a promise. A ballroom. A guest list. A dress already being altered. A ceremony Mom had opinions about before Ben and I had even decided on the music. Losing it felt like letting them take something else. But protecting it at any cost would have meant allowing the same system to reach into one more account. Ours. "Then we move it," I said. Ben's face tightened for a second. "The date? The whole plan if we have to." "You're sure?" "No." That surprised a laugh out of him. "Fair. But I'm sure we don't use the house reserve." He reached across the table. His hand stopped halfway. I put mine into it. The next morning, Naomi received my email. Pause the original date. Preserve any refundable deposits. Release nothing that would cost us more to keep than to lose. No new vendor commitments without approval from both Ben and me. The reply came 20 minutes later. "Understood. I'll send you a clean cancellation, refund schedule by tomorrow." It hurt. And for the first time since the live stream, something inside the hurt felt chosen. Olivia agreed to meet me 2 days later. A cafe near Rittenhouse Square. Neutral enough that neither of us could accuse the other of turning up with backup. She arrived 7 minutes late and sat down without taking off her coat. "You look tired," she said. "So do you." "Mom hasn't slept." I did not ask how she knew that. "Did you bring what I asked?" Her mouth tightened. "You mean my financial records?" "I asked whether you wanted to see the balance history that affected my share." "You make everything sound so clinical. Would you prefer vague?" That came out sharper than I intended. Olivia looked toward the window. For a second, she looked exactly like she had at 16, when Dad caught us coming home after curfew. Then she said, "Just show me." The packet I placed between us contained only what Nadia confirmed I could share. Her balanced timeline where it intersected with decisions affecting mine. No private details unrelated to me. No attempt to humiliate her. Olivia read the first page quickly, the second more slowly. At the third, her finger stopped. That can't be right. What part? This balance. That's the balance reflected in the records. There are other accounts. Which ones? Mom said. I know what Mom said. Her eyes lifted. There are investment accounts. Mom and Dad have personal assets. That is not the same as your trust share. Olivia pushed the papers away slightly. You're trying to scare me. No. You want me to think Mom spent everything on me so I'll feel guilty. That's not what the records say. What do they say? That your share was used for you for years. Then, as it got lower, expenses that benefited you started appearing in categories that touched mine. Her face changed. Not remorse. Resistance. So now you're auditing me. No. I'm auditing what happened to me. That's a cute distinction. It's an important one. She folded her arms. I didn't ask you to pay my mortgage. I know. I didn't ask you to pay for my divorce. I know. I didn't ask for your wedding money. That one I don't know yet. Her chair scraped lightly against the floor. I didn't. I studied her face. Not to decide whether she was lying. I had no reliable instrument for that. So far, I haven't found anything showing you directed the payments, I said. So why are you treating me like I did? Because not directing it and never asking where the money came from are not the same thing. She stared at me. That's unfair. Maybe it was. Maybe it was only incomplete. Either way, I had stopped filling every gap in Olivia's favor simply because I loved her. When she left, the packet stayed with me. She had not asked to keep it. Aunt Elaine called that evening. Unlike most relatives, she did not start by telling me what to do. She asked, "Are you willing to hear something about your mother?" That depends. It doesn't excuse anything. That made me sit down. Okay. Elaine told me about a college scholarship Mom had earned at 18. Not a fortune. Enough to get her out of the house. Enough to give her a different start. Then, Elaine, younger and struggling at the time, developed problems that required money and attention. Their parents redirected what they could toward Elaine and pressured Mom to stay closer to home. She was always the capable one, Elaine said, the practical one. My throat tightened. Those words. What happened to the scholarship? She gave it up. Did she want to? A pause. I don't know. Did anyone ask? Another pause. No. The answer sat heavily. Elaine continued. She used to say she'd never let one child go without if the other had enough. There it was. Not greed. Not simple favoritism. A rule. Inherited from pain. Made righteous by repetition. Elaine, I said. Did anyone ever ask Mom whether being strong meant she agreed to lose something? No. Neither did she. Understanding Mom made the evidence hurt more, not less. She had known what it felt like to be turned into the resource everyone else could draw from. Then she had built the same role for me. The next afternoon, Nadia and I reviewed the options. By then, the record was strong enough to establish several things without guessing. Mom had submitted payment instructions beyond the purpose of the authority I gave her. Dad had signed trustee certifications. Earlier expenses benefiting Olivia had been allocated into categories affecting my share. The frequency increased as Olivia's balance declined. What we did not have was a handwritten note saying, "Take Mara's money before she turns 40. Real life rarely supplied villains that organized. Nadia said, "You have choices. Go ahead. Private settlement with full accounting parameters. Negotiated resignation of the trustees for your share. Independent administration until your mandatory distribution date. Or litigation if they refuse." How long would litigation take? Potentially longer than 10 months. And cost? Enough that you should care. Independent trustee. Faster, if everyone agrees. Not free. How much? She gave me a fee range based on the account size. The number annoyed me. Good. Autonomy costing money felt more honest than free control from people who treated access as ownership. Who pays it? Your share. So, I pay someone to keep my parents from managing money they already mismanaged. In practical terms, yes. A laugh escaped me. That may be the most offensive line item I've ever approved. Nadia laughed too. Then I asked the question that mattered. Which option gets their hands off my share before my birthday? She stopped laughing. Negotiated resignation with independent administration is the cleanest path if they agree. Litigation remains available if they don't. Start there. You're sure? Yes. The decision did not recover $1 that afternoon. It did something more important. It changed the objective. The fight was no longer about persuading Mom to admit she had been unfair. It was about making sure fairness no longer required her permission. That evening, a message from Mom arrived. Not a voicemail. Not a demand. A written invitation. Come home Sunday. Your father and I have a proposal. We can make you whole and keep everything equal between you and Olivia. A second message followed. Your father and I have always intended the house, the brokerage accounts, and the lake place to be divided equally between our daughters. That has not changed. We can resolve this privately if everyone acts reasonably. I read it twice, then a third time. The trust was one thing. Their house, their personal investments, the lake cottage, those were theirs. Assets, they could leave equally, unequally, or not at all. For years, eventually, had been the word that ended every uncomfortable conversation about money. Eventually, it would balance. Eventually, we would both inherit. Eventually, none of this would matter. Sunday had just acquired a price. And for the first time, I could see exactly what they were trying to buy. Sunday had a price. The proposal arrived Friday afternoon. Nadia forwarded it with one sentence. Read it once before we talk. Don't sign anything. That was advice, not instruction. I appreciated the difference. The document was 14 pages long. The first 2 pages sounded almost generous. Mom and Dad would make an immediate repayment toward the wedding distribution. The remaining disputed amount would be placed on a structured schedule. They would affirm, in writing, their intention to divide their personal estate equally between Olivia and me. The mainline house, their brokerage accounts, the lake cottage, everything outside Grandma's trust. For a few seconds, the old reflex worked exactly as it had been trained to. See? They were fixing it. Nobody had to lose everything. The wedding could still happen. Mom might still stand beside me while I got dressed. Dad might still walk me down the aisle. Olivia might eventually stop telling people I had destroyed her birthday because I hated her. Then I reached page 6. The repayment required a broad release. Page 7 limited the historical accounting period. Page 8 required both sides to treat the distributions as a private matter resolved within the family. Page 9 left Mom and Dad in control of my remaining trust share until my 40th birthday. 10 months. The same 10 months I had already circled in my notebook. By page 11, their personal estate had appeared again. Not as a legal guarantee. As a reminder, they still intended to treat us equally. The words sat there like a ribbon tied around a locked door. Nadia called 20 minutes later. What jumped out at you? The release. Good. The accounting limit. Yes. And the fact that they're mixing 3 things together. Which 3? What belongs to me in Grandma's trust? What they may owe because of the distributions. And what they might leave me someday from their own property. That's how I read it. My finger ran beneath the sentence about equal treatment under their wills. They can change their wills. Yes. They can't take away my beneficial interest in the irrevocable trust just because I'm angry with them. Correct. But they can keep making the next 10 months difficult if they remain trustees. They have administrative authority until your mandatory distribution date, unless they resign, are removed, or the trust terms provide another route. And they're offering me future money they still control, in exchange for letting them keep current control. Nadia waited. She did not say exactly. Didn't need to. What would happen if I signed this as written? You'd get part of the disputed amount back quickly. You'd cap the deeper accounting. You'd release a broad set of claims. Your parents would remain trustees until the distribution date. And their promise about the house? Is an expression of current estate intent. It is not the same thing as money already vested in you. I looked at the page again. For most of my life, Mom had been able to end uncomfortable conversations with a future tense. Someday. Eventually. Later. One day it will all balance out. She had found a way to put eventually into a settlement document. I'm not signing this. Nadia's voice stayed even. Do you want to counter? Yes. That answer came easily. The rest did not. That evening, the unsigned proposal sat on our dining table beside 2 takeout containers and the cancellation schedule Naomi had sent for the original wedding. Ben read only the sections I showed him. Not because he lacked interest, because the trust was mine, and neither of us wanted to replace one form of financial dependence with another. He tapped the repayment paragraph. This part helps. It does. And this part? His finger moved to the language about Mom and Dad's estate. Could be worth more than what they took. Potentially. So that's the bait. The word bothered me. Maybe. Ben looked at me. You're still doing that. What? Giving every ugly possibility a nicer word until the documents force you to stop. That stung because it was close enough to true. He leaned back before I could answer. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm trying to understand. So am I. For a while, all we heard was traffic beyond the windows. Then he said, I'm angry about the million. You're allowed. I'm angry about what it does to our plans. You're allowed that too. The house fund isn't enough to recreate the wedding and still keep the cushion we wanted. No. We could do it if we changed the house timeline. Yes. We could do it if we pushed off trying for a child. My throat tightened. Yes. We could do it if I borrowed against my retirement account. No. That answer came sharp enough to make him blink. No, I repeated. We are not turning their decision into your debt. He nodded. Good. Something in my chest loosened. That was the line. Not the wedding date. Not the ballroom. Not whether Mom sat in the front row. Our future would not become the emergency account for something my parents had chosen. Ben looked down at the proposal again. If they paid every dollar tomorrow, would you trust them with the next 10 months? The question stayed in the room after he finished speaking. My answer should have been obvious. It wasn't. That was the humiliating part. Some piece of me still wanted to believe repayment could rewind the story. Money back. Wedding restored. Mom, apologetic. Dad embarrassed but present. Olivia, resentful for a while, then eventually normal. A neat reconciliation entry. Debit corrected. Balance restored. But that was not how records worked. Correcting one charge did not erase the controls that allowed it. No, I said. Ben nodded once. Then he closed the proposal. Saturday morning, Naomi met us at the ballroom. The place was empty, except for 2 employees, moving stacked chairs near the far wall. Our date still appeared on the sales manager's tablet. For another 40 minutes, it belonged to us. Naomi walked me through the numbers. What could be refunded? What would be lost? Which deposits could transfer to another date? Which vendors would charge cancellation fees? No one offered a miracle. Some money was gone. Some could be preserved. The ballroom itself was beautiful. That was almost inconvenient. High windows. Cream walls. The staircase Mom had loved because, in her words, everyone will see you come down. Months earlier, I had stood at the top of it while she described where Olivia should stand during photographs, not where Ben would stand. Olivia. At the time, that had felt normal enough that I barely noticed. Now the memory carried a different weight. Naomi asked, Do you want me to hold the date through Monday? My hand rested against the back of one of the chairs. Keeping it would cost another substantial payment. A payment that would come from money Ben and I had protected. A payment made mostly because letting go felt like admitting my parents had successfully damaged something. That was not a good enough reason to spend it. Release it. Naomi studied my face. You're sure? No. She smiled faintly. Fair answer. Release it anyway. The words hurt. They also belonged to me. We walked outside into bright spring sunlight. Ben unlocked the car, but instead of getting in, I opened the new shared email account we had created for wedding planning. Only 2 logins. His. Mine. No mom. No trustee. No payment agent. No helpful access. That afternoon, Naomi sent 3 smaller venue options. One was a conservatory outside the city with glass ceilings, indoor citrus trees, and enough room for about 80 people. The old guest list had been nearly 200. Mom knew half of them better than I did. The conservatory did not feel like a replacement. It felt like a question. What would the wedding look like if no one else needed it to prove anything? I saved the link, then opened the settlement proposal again. This time, I made 3 columns on a legal pad. Rights I already have. Money that must be accounted for. Promises that can change later. My trust interest went in the first column. The disputed distributions went in the second. The mainline house, brokerage accounts, and lake cottage went in the third. That last column was where Mom had hidden the emotional price. Not legally, psychologically. For years, she had answered every imbalance with the same promise. Eventually, everything comes back to you, girls. The sentence had always asked me to tolerate the present because the future would somehow compensate me. Olivia needed help now. My turn would come later. Her emergency mattered now. My fairness could wait. By the time Priya called about an unrelated work question, my counterproposal was already half-drafted. After we finished discussing the grant issue, she asked, "You okay?" I think I finally figured out what I'm negotiating. Money? Control. That was all I told her. The final counterposition went to Nadia before dinner. The accounting continued. Mom and Dad would resign control of my share. An independent corporate trustee would manage it until my mandatory distribution at 40. Restitution would be based on verified improper allocations, not an arbitrary number designed to make everyone feel better. The trustee fee would come from my share. That part irritated me enough that I left it in. I wanted the cost visible. Independence was not free. Neither had dependence been. Most importantly, no promise concerning Mom and Dad's personal estate would count toward settling what had already happened. No future inheritance in exchange for silence. No statement that the disputed payments were voluntary support for Olivia. No rewriting the record. Sunday afternoon, I drove to my parents' house alone. Ben had offered to come. I had said no. Not because he did not belong beside me. Because no one in that room was going to leave saying my fiancé had turned me against them. The mainline house looked exactly as it always had. Gray stone. Dark shutters. 2 enormous hydrangeas Mom complained about every summer and refused to remove every fall. 3 extra cars sat along the curb. My hand stayed on the steering wheel. One belonged to Aunt Elaine. Another to my cousin Beth. The third looked like Uncle Robert's Lexus. So much for a private conversation. When Mom opened the door, she was wearing the green blouse she saved for occasions she considered important. "You came. You invited me." Her eyes moved past my shoulder toward the driveway. "Ben isn't with you?" "No." Something about that seemed to satisfy her. She stepped aside. The dining room table had 8 place settings. Folders sat beside several plates. Olivia was already there. Dad stood near the sideboard pouring water. Elaine gave me a small nod. Beth looked uncomfortable. Uncle Robert said, "Hey, kiddo." As if this were Thanksgiving. Mom gestured toward my usual chair. We thought it would be healthier if everyone could hear the same thing. Everyone. Not everyone involved. Everyone useful. An audience. I set my bag beside the chair. "That wasn't what you said in writing." Mom's mouth tightened. "This affects more than you." There it was. The old math. My money. Everyone's consequences. Dinner had already been served in the kitchen, but nobody touched it. Mom remained standing. "Your father and I have spent days trying to find a solution that does not destroy relationships over accounting." My eyes moved toward Dad. He looked at the table. Mom continued. "We have offered to repay Mara. We have offered to preserve exactly what we have always intended for both girls. Same inheritance, same standing, same future." Olivia folded her arms. Beth looked at me, then away. Mom placed one hand on the back of her chair. "Fairness has never meant giving identical things at identical moments. It means helping the child who needs more when she needs it." No one spoke. I had heard that doctrine in kitchens, cars, restaurants, hospital waiting rooms, graduation dinners. Always dressed differently. Always ending in the same place. Me paying the difference. Mom looked directly at me. "We can make you whole." There was my cue. The version of me they had planned for would argue, raise her voice, list 20 years of grievances, make one emotional mistake large enough for everyone in the room to discuss instead of the documents. I opened my bag. 4 pages came out. Not the whole file. $1 million from my first marriage milestone distribution was used for Olivia's birthday expenses outside the authority I gave Mom. Mom opened her mouth. I raised one hand. Let me finish. To my surprise, she did. Second, Olivia's trust share had already been substantially depleted before those payments. Olivia shifted in her chair. Third, earlier expenses that benefited Olivia alone were coded into categories that affected my share. Dad looked up then. Those are disputed. Yes, which is why the accounting continues. His jaw moved. I placed the 4th page on top. Fourth, Dad co-signed trustee certifications on multiple transactions. The room changed without becoming loud. No gasp. No theatrical revelation. Just fewer places for the story to hide. Mom recovered first. We have never denied trying to support both of you. That isn't what I said. You are making technical distinctions about money that has always been intended for both daughters. No, Grandma made 2 shares. Mom's voice sharpened. And your father and I have personal assets that we have always intended to split equally. The house, our investments, the lake place. That is still on the table. I looked at the folders near the plates. So, that's the offer. It is not an offer. It is your future. No. It's a promise about assets you still control. Olivia leaned forward. What difference does that make if they're saying you'll get half? All the difference. Mom stared at me. Mara, do not be ridiculous. We are telling you that despite everything you've put us through, we still intend to treat you equally. A strange calm settled over me. Not because the sentence stopped hurting, because I finally understood its structure. Equal was not something they gave. It was something I was expected to keep earning. I slid my counter-proposal onto the table. The accounting continues. Mom did not touch it. You will both resign as trustees of my share. An independent trustee will administer what remains until my 40th birthday. Dad straightened. That will cost you money. Yes. Thousands. Yes. You would rather pay strangers than let your own parents manage it for 10 more months. Yes. The word landed more heavily than any speech could have. Mom's face changed. And what about the settlement? Repayment is based on verified transactions. We already offered that. You offered it in exchange for limiting the accounting and keeping control. We offered you peace. You offered me a release. Beth lowered her eyes. Elaine still had not moved. Mom pressed both palms against the table. And we offered to keep everything equal, including what you inherit from us. That isn't repayment. Her mouth opened. I continued. That is future money you still control. Money you can change your mind about. Money you've been reminding me about for years whenever I asked why Olivia got more now. Olivia said, "That's not fair." I turned toward her. "No, it isn't." She blinked. Mom stepped in before Olivia could respond. "Do you understand what you could be giving up? The house, the brokerage accounts, the lake place, possibly millions. Things that had existed in my head since childhood as a sort of invisible proof that eventually I would still belong." My fingers rested on the edge of the counter-proposal. "Yes." Mom's voice dropped. "You're willing to lose all of that? If you choose to change your will because I asked you to account for my money, that is your decision." Her expression hardened. "You say that now. I'm saying it in writing." Dad finally spoke. "Mara, think about what you're doing." "I have. You are paying a trustee, giving up control of how this gets resolved, risking assets that could benefit you and your children someday." "No, I'm taking control of what can actually be controlled." He shook his head. "Your mother may never forgive this." That sentence hurt more than the numbers. Of course it did. Some wounds stayed effective even after you learned their names. I looked at him. "I'm not asking her to." Olivia stood abruptly. "So that's it? You'd rather lose the house and the lake place someday than let this end?" I picked up my bag. "I'd rather know the difference between what's mine and what I'm being promised for behaving. You're punishing everybody." "No." The old answer would have continued. explained, defended, proved. This time I stopped. Mom called after me as I walked toward the foyer. If you leave now, don't expect us to keep chasing you. My hand closed around the front door handle. For years, that would have turned me around. The threat of not being pursued, not being called, not being included. It sounded different after 219 missed calls. I opened the door. Then don't. The drive home took 34 minutes. My hands shook for the first 10. By the time I reached the city, they had stopped. Ben was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by printed venue pages. He looked up when I came in. How bad? I think my mother just threatened to write me out of the will. His face tightened. And I told her that was her decision. He stood. For a second, neither of us moved. Then my eyes dropped to the pages on the floor. The conservatory was on top. Glass ceiling. Citrus trees. 80 guests. You kept that one? You saved it. I did. Thought maybe that meant something. It did. Not enough to erase dinner. Enough to remind me dinner was not the only thing happening in my life. The next morning, Nadia called while I was walking from the train station to my office. Your parents' attorney contacted me. I stopped near the corner, letting commuters move around me. What do they want? They are willing to discuss resigning as trustees of your share. For a moment, traffic noise seemed unusually far away. Both of them? Yes. Before my birthday? That is the proposal. And the accounting? They still contest several historical allocations. Of course they do. Nothing is finalized. I know. The independent trustee sent a preliminary fee schedule. My phone buzzed with the email while she spoke. I opened it. The number was irritating. Exactly as irritating as before. Maybe more. A percentage of assets under administration. Administrative charges. Transfer setup. Professional money to protect money from the people who had managed it for free. Free. I almost laughed on the sidewalk. What? Nadia asked. Nothing. Send them my counter on the disputed entries. You want to keep moving? Yes. I looked at the fee schedule again. For years, Mom had called her management free because she never sent me an invoice. She had simply charged me in other ways. Set up the independent administration, I said. Then I crossed the street toward work. For the first time since Olivia's birthday, nobody in my family had agreed that I was right. Nobody had apologized. Nobody had returned everything. But the hands that had controlled my share were finally beginning to come off it, and I was willing to pay for the difference. The first invoice from the independent trustee annoyed me more than I expected. Not because the amount was outrageous. Because it was so ordinary. Administrative transfer fee. Asset management fee. Document review. No manipulation hidden in the description. No vague, family adjustment. No promise that it would all even out someday. Just a bill. I sat at the kitchen table with the statement open beside my coffee and read the total twice. Ben came in, buttoning his shirt cuffs. That bad? Not bad. You're making the face. What face? The one where money has offended you. Priya had said almost the same thing weeks earlier. Apparently my face had a recognizable accounting dialect. It's expensive, I said. Independence? Apparently. He poured coffee. Worth it. My eyes went back to the fee schedule. Months earlier, that question would have made me calculate investment, drag, management percentages, and whether the same result could be achieved more cheaply. Now the answer was easier. Yes. The independent trustee had taken control of my remaining share 6 weeks earlier. Mom and Dad were no longer authorized to approve distributions. No more trustee certifications. No more shared cost allocations without independent review. No more requests passed through my mother because she handles these things. The historical accounting was still being negotiated. Some entries were straightforward. The birthday expenses fell clearly outside the authority I had given Mom. Several earlier charges tied exclusively to Olivia also had enough documentation to support repayment. Others were murkier. A few old expenses had been poorly described but arguably connected to legitimate shared administration. Nadia warned me that fighting over every ambiguous dollar could cost more than the amount in dispute. For the first time, that did not feel like surrender. It felt like choosing which battles were mine. The settlement that eventually emerged was not cinematic. No judge slammed a gavel. No one wrote me a check for $1 million while the rest of the room watched. The clearest improper transfers were formally recognized. Mom and Dad agreed to reimburse part immediately from personal funds and repay the rest on a schedule. Several disputed historical entries were compromised, rather than litigated for years. Their trustee roles over my share were over. The independent administrator would remain until my 40th birthday, when the trust required the remaining principal to come under my control. Nadia read the final language aloud during our last review call. No statement that you voluntarily supported Olivia. Good. No limitation preventing you from describing your own experience truthfully. Good. No future inheritance counted as repayment. Good. There is a mutual non-disparagement provision. That's fine. And the accounting closes once the agreed corrections and repayment obligations are entered. That one took longer. Closing the accounting meant accepting that I might never know the purpose behind every questionable transfer. There would be no complete moral ledger. No final spreadsheet where every unfair year resolved into a clean number. Do you think I'm missing something important? I asked. Nadia paused. I think you have enough to know what happened and enough to stop it from happening again. That was not the same as knowing everything. Maybe it was better. Then close it. When I signed, the document did not feel like victory. It felt like ending a subscription I should never have been enrolled in. The next morning, an envelope from Dad appeared in our mailbox. His handwriting made me stop before opening it. For a few seconds, the old instinct returned. Call him first. Make sure nothing was wrong. Ask if he needed something. Then I remembered that letters could simply be read. So I took it upstairs. The note inside was 3 pages, handwritten. Dad did not ask me to reverse the settlement. He did not blame Nadia. Did not say Mom had pressured him. The first paragraph was awkward enough that I almost laughed. He wrote that he had spent weeks trying to find a version of events in which his role was smaller. That sentence kept me reading. Further down, he wrote, I told myself your mother understood the trust better because she handled the distributions more often. That was convenient for me. Another line. There were approvals I signed without asking enough questions. Then, I thought keeping peace in the house was the same as keeping the family safe. I see now that sometimes it only meant making sure the conflict landed on someone quieter. That one hurt. Not because it was new, because he had finally used the right verb. Landed. For years, conflict had landed on me, and then disappeared from everyone else's view. Dad ended without asking me to forgive him. He wrote, I don't know what relationship you want with me. I will not decide that for you. I folded the letter. Ben was at the counter, cutting an apple. Good letter? I don't know yet. That's allowed. The letter went into the drawer beside the trust records. I did not answer. Not that day. Maybe that would look harsh to someone who had waited years for an apology. But accountability did not create an automatic deadline for reconciliation. He had taken years not to ask questions. I was allowed more than one afternoon to decide what his honesty meant. Olivia texted 3 days later. Can we meet without lawyers, parents, spreadsheets, or anyone else? I almost wrote back that there had never been lawyers at our cafe meetings. Instead, I answered, Coffee, Saturday, 11. She chose a place near Rittenhouse Square. Same neighborhood as before. Different cafe. When I arrived, Olivia was already seated. That was new. She had coffee in front of her and a small notebook beside it. Not a dramatic object. Just a notebook. Still, I noticed. Hi, she said. Hi. For the first few minutes, neither of us mentioned the trust. She asked about work. I asked whether she had closed the storage unit connected to the boutique. Yes. Her mouth tightened. I should have done it 2 years ago. Probably. She gave me a look. You don't have to sound pleased. I don't. A reluctant smile appeared, then disappeared. Olivia wrapped both hands around her cup. I cut a lot of things. Okay. Subscriptions, the car service, the club membership. I'm selling some inventory online. That sounds practical. Mom hates it. That statement could only come from what Olivia had personally heard, so I let it stand without adding meaning. She says I'm acting like you've convinced me we're poor. Have I? No. Her eyes lowered. I'm just not as protected as I thought. That was closer to honesty than anything she had said to me so far. A server stopped beside the table. Olivia ordered food. I did not. After the server left, she said, I didn't know everything. I believe you. Her shoulders loosened slightly. Then she asked, so why are you still angry with me? There it was. The same shortcut. If ignorance reduced guilt, then anger should disappear. My thumb traced the edge of the paper cup. Because not knowing everything isn't the same as asking nothing. She looked away. That's easy for you to say. Why? You've always known how to manage money. That isn't what I'm talking about. What are you talking about? All the times something expensive appeared after a crisis, and you never asked where it came from. She frowned. Why would I? Mom and Dad said they had it handled. So did I. That's different. How? You weren't the one falling apart. The sentence sat between us. Not shouted. Almost casual. That made it clearer. My usefulness had excused everyone else from asking what it cost. I was still allowed to own things, I said. Olivia's face tightened. I never said you weren't. No. You just never asked whether what you received came from me. She pushed her cup away. I didn't know. I know. Then stop acting like I planned it. I'm not. It feels like you are. That doesn't make it true. She stared at the table. For a while, nothing moved except people outside the window. Eventually, Olivia said, Mom keeps saying you chose money over us. She's allowed to say that. You don't care? I care. I'm just not fixing it. That answer seemed to bother her more than an argument would have. Our check arrived. The server set it in the center of the table. For most of our adult lives, I would have reached first. Older twin by 11 minutes. Better job. Better savings. The reliable one. Olivia reached for the folder. I've got mine. My hand stayed in my lap. Okay. She looked at me. Maybe she expected resistance. There was none. We split the bill. It should not have felt meaningful. It did. My 40th birthday arrived on a Wednesday. No party. No ballroom. No roses. Ben made pancakes before work and burned the first batch. At 9:30, a secure message from the independent trustee appeared in my inbox. The trust terms had reached their mandatory distribution date. There was nothing emotional in the message. No congratulations. No acknowledgement that 39 years of parental financial authority had just ended. The remaining principal of my share would be transferred according to the instructions I had already completed. Final accounting attached. Tax documents to follow. Administrative account to close after settlement of residual fees. That was it. For years, 40 had existed as an abstract legal threshold. Now it arrived as a PDF. I opened the final accounting, reviewed the figures, checked the transfers, matched the balances, then stopped. The old urge was to call Mom. Not because I needed permission. Because major things in my life still carried the reflex of reporting upward. I let the urge pass. Instead, a message went to Ben. It's done. He replied. How do you feel? My fingers hovered over the screen. Like I need breakfast again. His answer came back immediately. Now that sounds like 40. That afternoon, I met with a financial advisor I had selected myself. No relative referral. No parent in the room. No one talking about what Olivia might need someday. Part of the assets remained invested. Part was moved into accounts solely under my control. The house fund stayed separate from my individual assets. Ben and I had already discussed what would be joint after marriage and what would remain individual. That conversation mattered more to me than I expected. I had spent so much time escaping one kind of financial control that I refused to confuse love with automatic access somewhere else. Ben agreed. New argument. No wounded pride. Just documents. Clear ownership. Clear choices. A month later, Naomi walked us through the conservatory for the final time before the wedding. Sunlight came through the glass roof and broke across the tiled floor. There were citrus trees along one wall and climbing vines around a narrow iron staircase. 80 chairs fit comfortably. Not 180. Not 200. 80. At first, the smaller number had embarrassed me. It felt like evidence of loss. Then I looked at the list. Every name belonged there because Ben or I wanted that person in the room. Not because Mom worked with her husband. Not because Dad played golf with someone. not because excluding a distant cousin might send the wrong message. Naomi handed me the seating plan. Last chance to make changes. My eyes moved over the front row. Ben's parents. Aunt Elaine. Two close friends. Priya. Dad had not been assigned a ceremonial role. I had invited him. He had accepted. We were not pretending nothing had happened. He would attend as my father, not as someone automatically entitled to stand beside me during every symbolic moment. Mom's seat was still marked. Invitation accepted? No. 2 weeks earlier, I had sent her the same written boundaries I had sent everyone involved in the wedding logistics. No speech unless Ben and I approved it. No guest list changes. No surprise reconciliation. No attempt to turn the day into an announcement about Olivia. No vendor contact. The response came by phone. Mom did not say hello. A mother should not have to attend her own daughter's wedding under conditions. I was standing in the grocery store when she said it. Frozen foods on one side, canned soup on the other. The setting was so ordinary that for a second I nearly laughed. They're the same conditions everyone involved in the wedding has. I'm not everyone. No. That is my point. Her voice sharpened. You have turned this entire year into contracts and rules. Because informal access didn't work. I apologized for the party. She had said, I'm sorry things got out of hand. That was not the same sentence. But arguing over the grammar would not change the boundary. The invitation stands. Without a speech? Yes. Without being allowed to help? Yes. Without being treated like the mother of the bride? You are the mother of the bride. You're just not managing the bride. The pause after that was long. Then Mom said, if that's what you think motherhood is, maybe I shouldn't come. The cereal aisle blurred at the edge of my vision. Not because I was surprised. Because some threats still knew exactly where to land. My voice stayed steady anyway. Then don't. She hung up. For 3 nights, I woke around 4 and checked my phone. Nothing. No reversal. No message saying she had reconsidered. No Dad asking me to soften the conditions. No Olivia negotiating on her behalf. By the 4th night, I stopped checking. The wedding morning smelled like damp leaves and hairspray. Rain had passed before sunrise, leaving the glass roof streaked and bright. Naomi brought coffee into the bridal suite. Priya adjusted one of the clasps on my dress. Ben texted from somewhere downstairs. Still marrying me? My reply. Pending final compliance review. He sent back. I knew there'd be paperwork. I laughed harder than the joke deserved. Then, the room quieted, as Naomi handed me the seating card for the front row. Mom's chair had not been reassigned. That had been my decision. Not because I wanted a public symbol, because filling it would have felt like pretending absence had no shape. When the ceremony began, the doors opened toward the conservatory aisle. For 1 second, my eyes went directly to that chair. Empty. White ribbon tied neatly across the back. Nothing dramatic happened. No one gasped. No music stopped. No last-minute entrance. The chair stayed empty. My chest tightened so hard I had to take 1 slow breath before moving forward. Then another. Dad was seated 3 chairs away. He stood when everyone else stood. Did not step into the aisle. Did not claim a role I had not given him. That mattered. Not enough to erase the past. Enough to notice. Ben was waiting at the front. So I walked toward him. The ceremony continued. That sounds simple. It was not. For most of my life, an empty place created by Mom would have become my responsibility. I would have called, adjusted, apologized, made room, delayed something, paid something. This time, the empty chair remained empty. And my life continued around it. Hours later, after dinner and dancing and more photographs than I knew what to do with, I went upstairs to the bridal suite to change my shoes. The room was dimmer now. My bouquet lay across a chair. A garment bag hung from the closet door. On the small table beside the mirror sat an envelope, the final trust statement. I had brought it with me without really knowing why. Maybe habit. Maybe because that white envelope had followed me through almost every stage of the year. At the beginning, I used to leave statements unopened because I trusted other people to tell me whether anything mattered. Then I opened 8 years at once and discovered how expensive not looking could be. Later, the numbers became evidence. Then leverage. Then responsibility. Now the final statement sat beneath the soft yellow light of the bridal suite. Just paper. My wedding ring felt unfamiliar enough that I took it off for a second while changing shoes. The gold band rested beside the envelope. For a moment, both objects seemed to belong to entirely different versions of me. One represented money people had used to define obligation. The other represented a commitment I had chosen without surrendering ownership of myself. Voices came from the hallway. Priya laughed. Someone called my name. Then Ben's voice. Mara, are you hiding? Maybe. You're missing dessert. That sounds serious. Extremely. My hand moved toward the envelope. Stopped. There was nothing inside I needed tonight. No verdict. No proof. No number capable of telling me whether I had been a good daughter. I left it unopened. The ring went back on my finger. Then I opened the door. For years, being strong had meant proving I could live with less. Less help. Less attention. Less protection. Less room. What changed my life was finally understanding that strength was never permission for anyone else to take more. The envelope stayed on the table. I walked toward the people calling my name.